Good morning and welcome to the QUADRISE PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right-hand corner of your screen. Just click Q&A, scroll to the bottom, type your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question received during the meeting. However, the company review all questions submitted today and publish responses where appropriate to do so. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Andy Morrison, Non-Executive Chair. Good morning.
Thanks so much, and welcome everyone to our presentation and business update today. We're going to use a presentation here to take you through. Some of it will be familiar to you, and because you're already investors in the company, so we'll go as fast as we can, concentrate on the project, which I know that from the questions you've submitted, you're particularly interested in always to update. And we'll try and leave as much time as we can for questions and answers. There's a considerable number of questions that come through pre-asked, and we will attempt to address those both through the presentation and also afterwards. So we'll leave as much time as we can for debate. Of course, I'm joined here today by Jason. There's the two of us on. I'm afraid my broadband link isn't good enough for you to be able to see me, but I can see everything that's going on in the webinar, and I'll be working it with Jason. So the purpose of our presentation today is to give you the update and explain about the open offer which we've just recently launched. And you see the first slide there. If I move over, we have our regular disclaimer, which you can look at your leisure, and then I will move on to the summary. And as you know, as investors, what we're doing at QUADRISE is we're using advanced technologies and an increasingly focus on sustainable biofuels to provide low carbon energy solutions for our customers. And hardly needs saying about the scale of the market, the global imperative, all that is very familiar to you. We are at the point now where we are getting ready to commercialize the offerings, which have been such a long time in the making. I know from many of you have been involved much longer than I have as chairman. And what we're here for today is to, aside from explaining the update, is to explain why we're rating up to 3.3 million. 1.1 of that's already done through a placing which has been announced, and then there'll be an open offer which you're eligible for as investors, which we'll explain today. And we hope that you'll feel encouraged to participate to the extent that you can. And so with that, Jason, I'm going to hand it over to you to take us through it, and I'll be back later.
Sure. And yeah, the next few slides really give an overview, I guess, of the technology, and then more importantly, where we are in terms of the projects. And then Andy will finish off in terms of, I guess, the placing in the open offer. So what we have is, what QUADRISE have as a technology, which is unique to us, is basically we're deploying proven technology that's used in the asphalt industry today to make road emulsions, which are a blend of bitumen and water, normally sprayed as a top coat on roads. We're modifying those to produce stable emulsion fuels, which are essentially oil suspended in water, and we use the heavy ends of the barrel in a refinery, suspend that in water, produce a cheaper version of fuel oil called MSAR, and then we've then adapted that technology to then also incorporate renewable biofuels, such as incorporating the use of glycerin to make essentially both the cheaper versions of the alternatives. So they offer a 10% saving. The systems are very simple to deploy in refineries or in terminals, etc. And we also have an in situ blending solution now where essentially you can put a miniaturized version of the technology into a ship or next to a power station. And in terms of the installations, they're modular in format. They are installed typically in containers of about 40 to 20 foot in size. You can see a picture of the inside of one of the units on the left-hand side there. And the silver disc is actually the colloid mill, which mills up the oil droplets into very small particles of 5 to 10 microns. The systems are basically sort of drag and drop, plug and play in terms of the refinery itself. So the system in the middle is the units we put together in Cepsa to produce 1,000 tons a day of product, and that's similar to a setup that we'll be obviously using for MSC and in Valcor. And then the key thing is we then plug it into existing infrastructure. So it's a relatively straightforward implementation. The cost of doing so is several orders of magnitude less for the refinery, and similarly for the end user, it's pretty much a drop-in solution. The systems or the fuel itself are water-based. The fuel itself is water-based. So if you take a glass of water, drop the fuel inside, there's a nice video on our website that you're welcome to look at. Obviously, unfortunately, this is a PDF, so you can't see this video. But what happens is the oil naturally disperses in the water. You can handle it at much lower temperatures as well. So it means that the fuels are inherently safer to use than conventional oil-based fuels. And importantly, in terms of the legislation coming forward, they burn a lot better and more efficiently as well. So you get fewer emissions of things like nitrogen oxides, NOx, which forms of smog, particulates and black carbon, which obviously get inside your lungs or deposit on the Arctic Circle. But most importantly, in diesel engines, you get a much higher efficiency, which leads to a reduction typically of 5 to 10% in diesel engines. And that's really fitting the landscape that we're in today. So obviously there's lots of challenges for the energy sectors in which we're dealing, and we're involved in the marine sector, we're involved in the power sector, and the industrial sectors. All of these different markets are under a lot of pressure to start to decarbonise at different rates, obviously. And they all have their own features in terms of, the environmental drivers are really driven by legislation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But there's also a lot of consumer pressure now for some of the customers we're dealing with. The consumers are forcing our clients to actually have to start think about reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. The cost of doing this is expensive for some of the options. Not only is energy more expensive, as we all know, but some of these clean alternatives are really hugely expensive and require massive infrastructure. New infrastructure to actually be delivered, including renewable power for green fuels. So operationally, that requires also a lot of land to be utilised as well, which obviously availability is key. And then some of these drop-in biofuels, that are being used today in certain sectors like marine, will be poached by other sectors that can pay more in terms of for the aviation sector and the transportation sectors. And it's very important, whilst obviously delivering biofuel solutions, to make sure you're not taking food off people's plates. So the focus today is looking at waste-based solutions, which are potentially challenging to blend with oil. And that's really where our systems come into play. We offer a very clean solution which reduces emissions, which, as I mentioned before. We have plans in place to essentially reduce the oil or the fossil fuel component of our product over time, so that we have a 2030 solution which is completely net zero, and we're well on the way to actually delivering that as well. As I mentioned before, energy cost is expensive, so 10% energy savings is tangible. There's an example coming up in terms of what that means for a typical ship owner, to provide you some context there. But they're also very simple to deliver. So within 6 to 12 months, you can install the unit. They're scalable. So each of the units that you saw earlier, they produce about 350,000 tons a year. So you can produce 1 million tons a year with just three units, and you can just install additional units as you require. They're also less hazardous to use, and also in terms of the crew that'll be using the fuel, because it's a water-based, inherently safer fuel that we're delivering. That they're a lot safer than conventional fuels as well, and also some of the future fuel options, especially things like ammonia and methanol. In terms of the company, we've got a very strong team. Myself and others have been involved in emulsion fuels for many, many years, in my case since I left university, and also taking this all the way through to the commercial phase with previous endeavours in this field. So we have a lot of experience, not only at management level, but also at the board as well. A lot of senior executives from Shell on the board. But importantly, we also have a very good IP platform. So we have our own patents, not only for MSAR, but also for bio-MSAR now coming through, and also some of our new solutions like Blend on Board is going through the patent process at the moment. So our patents are jointly held in most cases with Neurion, who is our technology partner. They supply the additives that we use for the emulsification process. and Neurion were formerly part of AkzoNobel before they got taken over by Carlyle. So they were a very large entity that help our protect our IP. And internally within the company, we all buy into these cleaner, sustainable options going forward. So we're looking to deliver a net zero solution by 2030, but also appreciating that the transition solution is also needed, and MSAR and bio-MSAR cover that transition period in the next decade or so. In terms of the advantages of the technology, it has to obviously be cheaper to make for the producer. So in this particular case, because the refiner would normally have to blend to make fuel oil, they would normally have to blend distillates with heavy residues. By not using those distillates in the refinery and using the residues on their own, then that provides an increased margin in the refinery, which can then be shared with the end user so to produce a lower cost fuel. So if that margin is split roughly 50-50 between the producers and the consumers, in this case for a typical 100,000 barrel a day refinery, then that's a tangible margin for the refinery. In this example, that would be essentially doubling their refinery margin from $2 a barrel up to $4 a barrel. So for the refinery, it's a worthwhile investment. For this example, which is basically for 4 MMUs, 4 MSAR units, that would cost typically less than $20 million, and it would pay itself back with a margin above in less than 12 months, as you can see. And similarly on the end user side, and this example for this quantum of sort of fuel or replacement would feed about 40 large container ships. So that's about 6% of the MSC fleet as an example. That dual fuel conversion would cost less than $20 million. And with savings of sort of 1 to 2 million per year per container ship for 40 container ships, you can see that again the cost of conversion is paid back in much less than 12 months today. So not only is it an economic investment to do, but it also reduces the CO2 emissions as well for the consumer, which is obviously of increasing importance now. Obviously, that has to turn into margins for us. And for this example, for 4 MMUs, obviously there are considerable sales. We offer 2 business models. Licensing model, which we've just recently signed with Valcor, is one example. And then we also have a tolling model, which is essentially a build and operate type model where we capitalise the equipment, we'll supply it, and then we'll operate it on behalf of the client and get a fixed and variable fee. So obviously the margin, the sales revenues and the margins are slightly higher for the tolling model to recover our cost of capital. And in terms of the projects that we're working on, really we're working in 4 different sectors to make sure obviously we can develop each of these in parallel. With Valcor, we have a technology that's going into a heavy oil site, the Asphalt Ridge in Utah. This is I guess a very large reserve of extra heavy oil, which is also very low in sulfur. Our client that's developing the fields there are using a very low carbon means of extraction, which means that the oil itself is essentially CO2 neutral at the point as it comes out of the ground. And then if you can get that direct to the market, it means that for Valcor and the developers there, instead of having to get a WTI price for the crude oil, they can essentially access the fuel oil market with a low sulfur product and get potentially a $20 per barrel uplift on the product. And not only that, the fuel itself is also lower in carbon than conventional low sulfur fuel. So we're pretty excited about that development. There is also some interim solutions in terms of applications there, more local to the actual field itself. But ultimately, getting the fuel out via LA or Houston to the marine sector is the ultimate prize there. And that's also obviously where MSC container ship project comes in. They are large consumers of fuel oil. They run now the largest container ship fleet in the world of over 750 vessels, I think, to date. Keeps getting bigger. They consume about 10 million tons a year of fuel every year. So that's a considerable saving for them. If you think fuel oil is roughly $500 a ton today, that's if they can save 10%, that's a huge number for them. So with MSC, obviously we're looking as a marine replacement, not only of the conventional fuel oil they use today, but also biofuel. They're quite large users of biofuel as well, and our bio-MSAR product is of particular interest to them. In Morocco, we have an industrial client that's using fuel oil for drying purposes, and that drying application uses quite a considerable amount of fuel oil, in the order of about 250,000 tons a year, and we're currently in the middle of a trial there, and we can tell you a bit more about that. And then in the Americas, we're looking at diesel-fired power stations, specifically around sort of Panama and Honduras, where these diesel engines today are running on fuel oil. And we're offering a lower cost version of obviously fuel oil with MSAR, but then a future opportunity to use bio-MSAR to decarbonise. In terms of the status of these projects, with Valcor, we signed a site license agreement very recently, and a heads of agreement with them for a sub-license in the future as well. That's conditional on them getting their permitting in August, which will basically release their project finance. But on the basis of that, then essentially what we'll receive is $1 million will flow from their receipt of project finance to us, and then which we expect sort of after the permitting decision is made in August. We expect to get the funds through in September time. And then before the end of the year, once we deliver the equipment to site, we get another $500,000. And then there's a continual payment thereafter under the technology transfer agreement of $75,000 every quarter, plus a profit share. So for every barrel of oil we supply that comes through the MSAR or bio-MSAR products, then essentially we share in the uplift of any increased value that we might get from high value applications going into the fuel oil application, rather than it going to a crude oil or asphalt application at the gate. So it's a very exciting project for us. Obviously, Valcor are involved in a number of different facilities there, but the first project with heavy sweet oil is a very interesting one. But there are other projects that could develop on the back of that. Also linked, with the growth in these types of green projects in the US as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's there's a lot of excitement in the US at the moment on these types of green projects. In terms of MSC, where we are is that the MSC Leandra has gone to dry dock. It's had a scrubber installed. They made some efficiency modifications, including a new bow. So they made some modifications to the vessel, and it's now essentially ready for MSAR and bio-MSAR deployment. And it's now coming. It's basically on a route that's back in Europe and circling Europe and the US at the moment. So the vessel's ready. We're in the process of finalising the fuel supply agreements in terms of the supply of obviously the glycerin, of the fuel oil that we need to actually blend to make the fuel, and also the installation. And there's some questions I think associated with that coming up that we can answer that in a bit more detail. So we need to conclude those fuel supply agreements to be ready to start supplying the vessel early in the first half of 2024. And the plan there is for the trial. The MSC Leandra has previously run on MSAR for quite a long period of time, but because they've made the changes to the vessel, the plan is to do a short proof of concept on MSAR, and then do a back-to-back trial with bio-MSAR, because the vessel's never, the bio-MSAR's never been used on a two-stroke engine. All the testing so far has been on a four-stroke engine. So the MSC Leandra will run briefly on bio-MSAR. Assuming all goes well as we expect, then it will continue operating on bio-MSAR for the first half of next year, with a view to getting 4,000 hours of operation under its belt, so that we can get a letter of no objection from Wärtsilä, assuming all goes well. In Morocco, we're in literally mid-trial at the moment. We got the kiln that we were testing. You can see the picture on the right. We got that up to full load, and unfortunately had a very unexpected failure in one of the parts of kit on our units, which it's the first time we've ever seen a failure, but it's due to a faulty part that was installed on the unit. So we replaced that very quickly. The system's now ready to run again, and we're literally waiting to hear with the client as to when we'll be on site. Hopefully this month, but we'll obviously let shareholders know as to how that progresses, and we've got a meeting later this week to discuss that. And then in Americas, we signed an LOI with a client in Panama early this year, with the intention of getting the trial agreement signed. In Panama at the moment, there's almost a state of emergency where they've had an extended dry period in Panama, where there's normally a wet period by now, and the hydro plants are starting to run again. which then reduces the load on the fuel oil plants. But at the moment, all the fuel oil units have been running pretty much on base load, which is unusual. So we need a spare engine to do the trial, which is holding up the signature of the trial agreement and getting started there. But that's expected to change soon. I think they've had rainfall recently, so once that progresses, then we should obviously then get the trial agreement signed off and then deploy our equipment to site. And the intention there is to initially do a blend on site sort of production of the fuel using the fuel oil to justify the emissions and efficiency benefits, with a view of commercial supply of more of a rigid-based MSAR going forward. And there are multiple clients there. One of the clients that we're dealing with is also involved in a larger power station in Honduras as well. And in terms of in terms of the resources we have to hand, at the end of last year, the end of 2022, we had a cash, basically in our interims, we basically had cash at 2.6 million. We're spending about 240,000 a month, which excludes our project costs, which, if we don't spend anything on projects, takes us through to Q4. And we obviously we expect revenue generation from the end of sort of Q3, early Q4, obviously subject to the approval of the Valcor project moving ahead. And then we have tax losses to offset against future profits as we progress. And in terms of the team, it's essentially the same as we discussed here in the interims. We've got an excellent bunch of people working under us. Three of them are based in Essex, and you can see Bernard on the right-hand side. He's based there with a couple of chemists doing a great job in terms of the R&D work that we're doing. And then we've had additional support from consultants as well that we bring in. And we have experts from Alstom, for instance, who look at burners. We have a couple of consultants who previously worked with Wärtsilä on the diesel engine application. So among others, we also have chemists that we bring in who are sort of specialist PhD chemists in surfactants and surface behaviour. How much are you, Andy?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. And just to make it a little bit interactive, I'm just seeing some of the questions that are coming up, and I'll just maybe address a couple of those before I get into this slide. So Ross asked, are there properties of MSAR that are transferable to sustainable aviation fuel? Does the company have plans to emerge or participate, I guess you mean, Ross, in this market? And the short answer to that is no, we're not going to go into aviation fuels. But I think the question is interesting because what we are doing is something quite parallel. We are very much in the market for sustainable marine fuels. And I think that's one of the things which we found has resonated with investors during the placing process, that they're really keen for us to push harder and faster on the net zero products. So the answer to the direct question is no, we're not going to go into aviation, but we are very much into that area, and into the marine area. And then I'll also take on the next question from Mark. A recent poll on a well-known forum showed that 70% of voters would not contribute to the open offer. This suggests to me that the board's credibility has been totally shot. How do you see the board's credibility? Well, I'm not going to comment on how we see the credibility. That's for others to say. But I do think that this question is at the heart of it. I'm hoping that the people who are on this call are amongst the 30% who are very much considering that they would contribute or in any event. But I think where we're at, and we're trying to be completely open and honest with people, both at the AGM and now, is there's a huge potential in this business, and that potential hasn't gone away. And we're balancing that all the time against our ability to deliver on those projects and promises that we're making, and that is the key. That is the key thing. Now, where we've got to now is that we believe that we can get the Morocco business done. We can get revenues from Valcor, and we can get the MSC trial underway with the money that we're now raising. And that is what we're saying, and that is what I think will generate real value for the shareholders. And we're trying to balance that. So the interest in our sector is increasing. It's not reducing. It's getting up and faster, and people want us to do more. But each project's got lots of moving parts, and we have even though you might say 240,000 a month is quite a bit of money, we have limited resources at the end of the day, and we are always in the business of putting our best foot forward. So we have to say this is what we think it's going to be, and we don't expose every single challenge that we face in that. There are a lot of moving parts in these projects, as many of you understand. So, but I do think, what's the choice? The choice is press on and see the job through, or give up. And I think overwhelmingly the situation is we should be pressing on to see the job through. And so what we're doing, and going back to the slides now, then raising 3.3 million in total, up to which is enough to see us through to profitability according to our own calculations. We've got 1.1 million of that in the bank, shall we say, and we're now making an open offer of up to 2.2 million to existing shareholders. And as I just said in my preamble there, we're answering the question, that will see us through to commencing the low-node trials, commercial revenue generation in Morocco and Utah. So we very much encourage shareholders to take up their allocations within this, and if you are able to apply for the excess, because we do believe we're on the cusp, and that it's much better than the alternative of not doing this. Let's move forward. So what we're aiming for with the current position, we've got the proven solutions in the energy market, in the energy markets, the portfolio projects which Jason has been explaining to you, and the IP behind that. We've got a funding plan, and we're aiming to produce sustainable revenues, energy decarbonisation solutions by a net zero solution by 2030, and that gives us a much broader value proposition. So we will be in a much better position, says Andy. And that's we strongly believe that this amount of money will get us there, and is much better, as I say, than the alternative. There's another question which I'll take now, which is kind of related. Bob says there's much here that appears positive. I'm therefore surprised that, given we are on, or seem to be on the cusp of good things, that the support for the open offer from those closest to events are frankly underwhelming. With the exception of Andy in the placing, why are the team members not making meaningful investments at this time? And I think, thanks for commenting on my contribution, and I hope and my intention is that it won't be the last contribution that I would make over time. But I think there's no reason to question the dedication of the team members here. I think a lot of people have put money in at much higher prices than I've been putting it in the past. A lot of people are putting a lot of hours into this business, and as Jason said for himself earlier on, for example, he's been involved in the emulsion fuels business since he left university. So you don't really get much more dedication than that. Everyone has their own financial circumstances, and there's only so much one can question that. And I think what we shouldn't question is the commitment of the team to see this job through as we want. There are a couple of questions pre-issued or pre-advised, and also on the chat forum, which relate to individual salary commentary and so on. And I don't think we will be answering those, but there is, we do look at all those. The compensation committee is very active in assessing what should and shouldn't be done on basis of the performance that we see in front of us. So we won't be answering individual questions on that, but that is something which we're very much focused on. So here we are then with the summary. Our energy decarbonisation strategy is, the external environment is very much moving in our direction. We know as our shareholders do that we're well positioned to serve these. You can see the projects that we've got. We are focused very much on those projects, and we'll come on to some questions later on around, are we doing this, are we doing that? And actually the answer to most of that is no, we're focusing on the projects. And we'll answer some of those questions more specifically, because what we're trying to do is to get these use cases or these projects over the line so that we can then attract serious partners to scale them up. That's what we want to do. We want to get to a point where we've created real value, and then we can scale from there. And that's what we're seeking your help for as investors at this point. Okay, let me hand back now, Jason. I don't know if you have any final points before we go into the Q&A.
No, Andy, I think you covered it very well. I mean, just coming back to, I guess, participation in the open offer. In my particular case, that's all I have to put in. I haven't got any investments anywhere else. That's all my savings going in due to my own personal circumstances. So, yeah, if I had more to put in, I would do. Unfortunately, I don't.
That's fantastic, Andy. Jason, look, thank you very much indeed for the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, do please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab just situated in the right-hand corner of your screen. Just while the team take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you, recording the presentation along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A can be accessed via your investor dashboard. As you can see, we've obviously received a number of questions throughout today's presentation and pre-submitted, as you said, Andy. If I may, could I just hand over to you just to read out the question where appropriate to do so, and either take the question or I'll pass it over to Jason and I'll pick up from you guys at the end.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. So we'll start on some of the pre-asked questions and we'll do a bit of mix and match here perhaps. But first question number one, it always feels as though QUADRISE is going to turn the corner, but yet another placing and no real business coming in. What's different now for us to ever think this company will make money?
Yeah, and I guess in terms of, hopefully we covered that in the presentation, but the combination of making tangible progress across the key projects and an increasingly supportive sort of macro environment as well, including the legislation that's coming in the shipping industry, the marine industry, is putting us in a much stronger position today. So, we're expecting the Utah project to deliver revenue from Q4 this year, and I think there's some questions around where the status of that, so we can cover that specifically maybe in another question. But also the more recent legislation coming in Europe, and also the legislation that's being mooted by the IMO, which is increasing the rate of decarbonisation in the marine sector, will definitely help the delivery of our lower carbon, lower emitting fuels, basically for the marine sector especially.
And there's a few questions around the supply of fuel for MSC. Question 2, for example, is, are MSC involved in finding a fuel supplier? If so, please provide any details that you can.
Yeah, and in terms of MSC have been very supportive in introducing us to their current bunker fuel suppliers, obviously supplying very large commercial volumes of fuel to them to the tune of 10 million tonnes is their requirements annually. And obviously MSC are promoting their collaboration with us, as well as I think some of the shareholders picked up in the recent sustainability report in 2022. So yeah, MSC are providing all the support they can. The reality is to put together a trial requires a different approach to potentially to commercial supply, because essentially what we're doing is we're supplying the MSC Leandra with fuel on an intermittent basis, right? So it would be every month to once a month, every sort of 4 weeks to 6 weeks, depending on the route that the vessel's ultimately on. So that's to do the trial requires a different approach to potentially doing commercial supply in the future. So we've had to be very creative in terms of bringing in other parties into that arrangement as well, to try and get this delivery of the trial volumes underway in the shortest period of time.
Okay, and let's try and continue on the MSC theme for a minute. Take Jake's question from the Q&A. How many ships are being targeted for any initial rollout of MSC, and then how many could ultimately be run on the MSAR or bio-MSAR?
Yeah, so in terms of the number of ships that obviously being targeted initially, we have the MSC Leandra, which is a trial vessel, and then potentially another vessel will come into play during the first half of next year, but that's yet to be scheduled. For that other vessel, so the MSC Leandra, the advantage of that ship is that it's previously run on emulsion fuel and has a booster unit already installed. Any new vessel will require a booster unit which needs to be ordered and delivered to the vessel, and that order is yet to be placed, but that takes typically 3 to 6 months to get that vessel up to speed and running on on MSAR after that. So the initial focus is on the Leandra to get that up and running and getting supply systems in place there. And then in terms of the ultimate scope for the MSC fleet, that's in excess of 25% of their fleet today. Have got electronic engines, and they're obviously buying vessels all the time. But yeah, initially 25% is the ultimate goal of the MSC fleet. And they also obviously have the cruise ships as well, which we don't include those at the moment.
Okay, thanks. And Mark asks specifically about the HAZOP test. I don't know the answer to myself, but maybe you do, Jason. Has it taken place, or will it take place? Can you just update Mark on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the HAZOP is done independently of the vessel. So that's basically a paper exercise. So it doesn't need the vessel to be in a particular position to actually do the HAZOP. So it can be done essentially remotely. So we expect that to be done sort of early this quarter. But once we've completed it, we'll let shareholders know. But it's essentially a paper exercise involving Lloyd's Register, MSC, the OEM, which is Wärtsilä, and ourselves to get that done. A similar process to we did before with MSAR. And obviously the vessel was going through the modifications and changes until quite recently, so that delayed the exercise being completed, but we expect that to happen very soon.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the pre-asked one, question 5, which is also on MSC, but it also addresses Mark's further question about the MSC trial. But question 5 is, as per the placing an open offer RNS on July the 7th, the MSC proof of concept Lono is now set to start in H1 2024. It was Q4 2023 in the mid-May business update RNS. I would like to understand better what circumstances caused this additional delay of 6 months. The original window for the trial provided was Q4 2021. Also, what is your confidence that you'll actually be able to meet the revised timeline? Thanks. Okay,
yeah, good question. Well, the key thing is really now is a fuel supply. Okay, so the reason for the delay is we don't expect it to be 6 months. We expect to be supplying the early part of Q1, sort of 2024 is the current plan. But obviously we have to prepare for particular delays if there are any. But the current plan is to supply the vessel during the first half of the year, as you saw in the presentation. And the early part of 2024 is a scheduled window. Obviously, to do that, we need to secure the supply of glycerin, which we've done now. We have a supplier of glycerin who's able to supply not only trial volumes but isn't interested in commercial volumes going forward. And then the complication is really around pulling together the suppliers of the glycerin and the fuel oil, and then finding a particular location with the permitting that's already there to actually be able to blend biofuels and then deliver those biofuels to the vessel. Those biofuels, if you look at marine biofuels today, if you can supply those from the Netherlands, then you also get credits, HBE credits they're called, which basically subsidizes the use of biofuels in the marine industry. So obviously we need to qualify for that as well. So all these things need to be pulled together. I don't want to sound patronizing, but there's a lot to pull together to actually get these trials done. But I was actually at the terminal this week. So we're looking at, we've looked at a number of terminals, and we're coming now to sort of narrowing down exactly where we want to be and putting together all the agreements that need to be done to get the trial volumes delivered to the vessel in the first half of next year, early H1.
Thanks, Jason. I think you've probably answered most of the following question, but let me just ask that one anyway and see if you've got any further comments on it. I've reviewed all RNSs over the last year, and there appears to have been no substantial progress in negotiations with Lono fuel suppliers. What's the specific area of contention, and how much longer is it going to take?
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, a very good question. I can imagine the frustration of shareholders. I mean, basically, the main areas we've been working on over that period have been the commercial partners for glycerin, all of which have their own glycerin supply. So we've had to test a lot of samples as well to demonstrate that their glycerin derivant is working properly in our particular mixture. So that's involved obviously QRF and feedback there. But those commercial partner discussions are pretty much complete now. And then the next bit is then selection of bunker partners, and specifically, particularly terminals availability. Where can you do this, and where are their licensed premises do this biofuel blending, because it's in the marine sector, it's at its relevant infancy, so that actually the number of terminals doing this is more limited than they will be in the future. So obviously that's taken a bit of time to find those out and work together with the biofuel partners who've been very supportive in basically bringing these terminals into the discussions. So obviously these things are slightly more complicated than we first believed, but we're now coming to a point where we've got some very detailed plans being put together to actually implement the delivery, obviously, of the vessel to the fuel and delivery of the fuel to the vessel in the beginning of the next year. But the next milestone in terms of shareholders is the signature of the agreements for the trial supply, and that's our immediate focus as a matter of priority now.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to move on to question 8. I have a question regarding the following paragraph in the July 7th placing RNS. It can read as MSC starts to doubt using MSC, concerns about supply pressure mark for their fleet, hence the route to commercialization with MSC is taking longer than originally envisioned by QUADRISE. Basically, to paraphrase the question a little bit, it's asking about the motivation of MSC as we see it. Are you able to comment on that, Jason?
Well, I think the support from MSC is fairly evident for the fact that they purchased the MSC Leandra as an example, and obviously then they spent money on upgrading it and getting it ready for the MSAR trial and the bio MSAR trial. Really, their focus is on making sure that vessel can run on both products. Obviously, it's run on MSAR before, so that we have a short test there, given they made modifications to the vessel, and they've also deployed that to Europe, right, in readiness for the trial. So in terms of their commitment, I think MSC are doing all that they can, obviously, and the collaboration is evident through their sustainability report as well. Really, the onus is on QUADRISE to make sure that we bring in some sizable partners in terms of the delivery of the fuels for the future for them. Okay,
thanks. We may very well come back to MSC because it's obviously such a key part of the business in the future. But I'm just going to move to question 12, which is a kind of linking question. If we're struggling to get a fuel supply agreement for MSC, how are we going to supply the Morocco client at a competitive price on the back of a commercial agreement?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the requirements, they're sort of quite different. So for MSC, we're looking at essentially the first priority is the supply for the trial volumes. So obviously we're focused on that at the moment. And with MSC, predominantly it's going to be bio-MSAR, so it involves different parties. And also in terms of the location, we're talking about Northwest Europe, ideally, to take advantage of the tax credits in the Netherlands for the biofuel. So the delivery for the Morocco client is quite different, and that's obviously a residue-based MSAR, of which obviously we have potential suppliers that we've used before or have spoken to before for supply of MSAR for the Maersk project. And on the back of completing the Morocco trial successfully, then we expect to obviously progress to commercial discussions and have a commercial agreement in place for supply, which will greatly assist the discussions with those particular refiners. But having said that, those refiners will also be interested in the future for bio-MSAR as well, because a lot of these refineries are converting to biorefineries or are expecting to supply biofuels from their locations as well. So the rise of bio-MSAR will definitely help, but the discussions are quite different and being held separately from MSC.
Okay, and let's move over the Atlantic to ask another question. Number 13, what exactly is holding up the agreement to progress in the America Power Company project? Do we have a dead duck here, similar to the Esmeraldas refinery project?
No, I mean, the delay of the agreement is really due to the situation in Panama at the moment, where the fuel oil power stations are running flat out at base load, and they don't have any scope or availability to take an engine out of service and actually run it for a trial. So before once they resolve that situation in Panama, which they expect to do imminently, then we expect the trial agreement to be signed.
Right, thanks. And then there's a series of pre-asked questions around effectively other projects. And that, for example, where exactly are we with the Mexico project, about Saudi Arabia, about synergies with the Carlyle Group, about Kuwait, Merlin Energy. JGC, for example. What are you able to say, Jason, about these other projects?
I mean, the other projects we are progressing as a lower priority. I would say that our experience with the Middle East is that ideally what we need to do is get MSC or one of the other projects up and running before we spend a lot of effort again in those particular regions. If shareholders remember, really, the Saudi project was due to commence after the Maersk project, and then as a result of Maersk delaying their implementation of MSAR indefinitely, then the Saudis basically parked the trial that we had planned. So I think evidence of progress in some of these other areas in terms of the core projects is really our main focus. And once we demonstrate that and we have actually fuel flowing and something for the Middle Eastern clients and others to see, then that will accelerate potentially the implementation or at least the discussions in those other areas, of which we can really much pick up on the work we did previously, because the energy situation hasn't changed remarkably since we talked with them a few years back. So yeah, these other discussions are ongoing, but as a lower priority, really, we're a small team and we have to be very focused on delivery of the core projects now to get revenues into the company, as we expect to get from Valcor.
Thanks. And I probably should have asked this one before that, but to come back to Morocco for a second, the question 20, when exactly is the next slot for the Morocco test?
So we actually have people on site next week, making sure that we're ready to go. At the earliest opportunity. The reality is in Morocco, the site that we're doing the trial basically produces products to order. That's got a very large capacity there, but it essentially runs on a campaign basis, and that's really, we only know when we'll actually be carrying out the trial 1 or 2 weeks in advance. So we have to make sure that we're ready. So we have people going out to site as an example next week. But yeah, we expect it to be imminent, but we can't say exactly when at this moment in time. But what I would say is, in terms of the client, the Moroccan client, and the people on the particular site that we're operating at, they're extremely supportive in making sure that this trial is a success, because they see that as a real sort of fillip for them as well. And they've run tests before at this particular facility, so they're very well geared up and very supportive of these types of endeavours that we're embarking on now.
Okay, and what about going back to the questions on the Q&A just for a second? Vic asked a question about how genuinely confident are you of drilling license for Utah will be granted, considering the possible legal challenges from Hoodoo? Yeah, so I guess to explain to others who may not be fully aware, there was a challenge to the approval of the license, the drilling licenses and the underground injection permits to Valcor from a company called Hoodoo. Hoodoo have an existing license on some of the same territory for conventional oil and gas. So some of the objections were around the validity of that. The latest is that obviously Hoodoo have been allowed to continue participation in the hearings, but the reality is that the decision made in December 22 granting the drilling licenses to Valcor has been upheld. They still require underground injection permits, which they expect to get through in August. But feedback we have from Valcor is essentially that the objections from Hoodoo have been thrown out now. They can participate in the hearings, but they can only comment on technicalities of any submission by Valcor. In terms of the fundamental basis behind the Valcor business is looking at non-conventional oil in that particular area, and the area is called the Asphalt Ridge, essentially. So it's full of non-conventional oil, and there's very little conventional oil and gas, which is what Hoodoo are trying to take advantage from. But in terms of the definition of non-conventional oil, in terms of all of the samples that have been taken from the fields that Valcor plan and Heavy Sweet Oil and others plan to extract, it's definitely non-conventional oil. All the samples we've seen are definitely bitumen, and that's really that essentially underwrites the decision that's already been made and will continue to be made by the Utah Department of Oil and Gas and Mines. And really, there's a lot of economic incentives for that particular region to develop these projects, because there's very little being done on the conventional side anyway, because there's very little there. So yeah, we're very confident that a lot of the, and with that comes from feedback from Valcor that the decisions will be granted.
in August, and obviously then that will progress to the drilling being drilling commencing and funds flowing obviously to us as well.
Yeah, we're starting to need to look at the clock a little bit here. We've got time for some more questions, but I'm going to just take one sort of future-looking question here. Question 21: our Vertolo relationship is a new technology. When is the crude sugar oil bio-MSAR going for further testing?
Yeah, so the crude sugar oil comes from, obviously, it's extracted from sustainable biomass, so from wood chip. One of the projects we're working on is with Vertolo, who have basically a C5, C6 type product, which looks, for all intents and purposes, like honey. Actually smells a bit like honey as well when you're testing it. But essentially where we are with that is we've done the aquafuel testing already with up to 20% of the CSO product in bio-MSAR, and obviously the remainder being glycerin. But now we're pushing that up to 40% of CSO only, so basically, with zero glycerin in, to see if that works as well. The testing in the lab is going well. It looks like it's performing well. So the next plan is to run that fuel on the diesel engine that we own that's installed actually currently in aquafuel. And then assuming that goes well, then the plan after that is to do a larger scale testing at VTT in Finland on a Wärtsilä engine, which is basically a 32 four-stroke engine. And that was very, very useful then to present the data to MSC and Wärtsilä to demonstrate that the performance of the fuel was quite similar to their experience with MSAR before. So that's the next steps. We expect during Q3 to get the aquafuel testing done and published. Q4 we should be able to embark on the VTT testing if all goes well. Then with a view potentially to incorporating some of the CSO product maybe at a later stage in 2024. And there's some other work going on beyond. If there's not a question on it, there's some other work going on beyond that, both with the existing, C5, C6 suppliers, but also with pyrolysis oil suppliers as well. And we've just signed an agreement with BTG Bioliquids on their wood-based pyrolysis oil, of which they have 3 plants producing 75,000 tonnes a year of this type of product, and looking for a higher value market in the marine sector to find a home for it. So we have a means of blending these types of products into a marine biofuel going forward, which is obviously an advantage of our technology platform, which is unique to us.
Okay, thanks. I guess there's a couple of questions that I'm going to answer from the pre-answer I've answered myself. Question 24: where are we with the strategy to partner up with a bunker supplier? This has gone quiet and seems to me like a very sensible plan that may have passed us by. And the next question: given a serious lack of progress, has there any further thought been given to selling the technology onto a larger entity? And I think absolutely we see the potential benefits of strategic partners to accelerate the growth and address the whole scale of the opportunity. Little old QUADRISE is not going to decarbonise shipping on its own, for example, of that sector. We will be exploring that more actively. What in a sense what's holding us back is we want to get to the point where we've got something truly of value. That's why we're so keen to get these use cases done and dusted, so that then we've got something which will give better value to shareholders when we come to trying to do those kinds of deals. So we don't necessarily want to sell the technology in a sense, but we're willing to do deals to make sure that we can scale it. And so it's very much on our minds, and we like everyone else, we're really keen to get the use cases done, and that's what we're really raising this money for. And we're very much aware. I mean, there's a whole thread of questions around, you've had this money before and you didn't do it last time, kind of thing. We're very much aware of that, we're not immune from further delays. We could have them, but we're confident where we stand that we will be into revenues, and that we will, from Morocco, Utah, and we'll be into the trial with MSC. We're confident we can be on that. And as I said before, the alternative of not being confident and just giving up is not attractive either. So I'm just going to try and move back to the questions of the day. There are a lot of them, and it's hard to answer some of these in a few sort of pithy words. So Vic says, Andy, you say we are on the cusp, as we have been for the last two placings. What makes this cusp different? I think what's different is that we have a little bit more control over our own destiny on this, in the sense that, for example, that with Morocco, the trial is now happening. We just sort of finish it, and then we can talk about the supply. With MSC, it's up to us to come up with the supply. So I think that a lot of the moving parts have been nailed down, and I think that's what makes it different, or makes it feel different at this point in time, and makes it worthwhile seeing this job through. So that's where I see it as different. And Alistair asked the question, what was the thinking behind raising money in advance of the conclusion of the Morocco trial, which, if imminent and successful, would presumably have resulted in cash being raised at a materially higher share price? And I think that's the rub is in the conditionality of the question. As we've explained, as Jason explained, we had enough money to last till the beginning of the fourth quarter. So yes, we could have waited until September, October to try to do a fundraise, but we considered whether that was in the best interest, and we felt taking it to the wire was not in the best interest. And some of the very professional investors that we talked to in the placing process, they said, Andy and Jason, you're doing the right thing. You needed to do that now. We think that the market conditions are horrible now, but they could get worse. They don't necessarily get better. And I think this is the time to shore that up. David says, it's our money that's going to fund salaries, so why can't you comment? And all I would say, and it's a fair challenge, and again, it's hard to make it clear in a few words. We, of course, we will report on salaries, but what I was saying was we're not going to comment on individuals' salaries during the course of this presentation. But we will, we look at the compensation committee is already talking to me about, what are the parameters for what we achieve, what we not achieved, and that will all be reflected. It's a different conversation when you're talking about executive directors than it is if you're talking about other staff. When you're talking about other staff, the question then is a little bit, it's more specifically around retention comes into it in more of a way, because people have other opportunities. So if you give junior staff a hair shirt, then there's a risk that they'll move on. So we are very much on the case of that. No money is spent that we don't need to spend.
There's a question from Paul G. Andy. Just why has all mention of using standard MSAR with MSC suddenly gone dead? It certainly hasn't gone dead, Paul. That's not the case. Obviously, the intention of doing the MSAR proof of concept is to repeat the work that we did before on when the same vessel was previously the Seago Istanbul. So, depending on the results of that, then we expect to see the validity of the interim loaner that we got on that engine, same engine, to be valid too, which may accelerate the use of MSAR going forward as well. And certainly, in terms of if you speak to their traders, they're using, or you look at their sustainability report, their predominant use today is of fuel oil. So if they can find a cheaper version of fuel oil, which is lower in carbon as well, and carbon intensity, then that provides a very interesting option for them going forward. But for the trial and getting the trial done and getting the agreement signed, it's all around the bio-MSAR supply, because that's the bulk of the fuel initially. But for the future, in terms of their demand, MSAR is definitely much in scope.
Andy, I was just going to step in there very quickly. We are coming up to the hour mark, and I know you have covered off a lot of questions that we've come through today. And of course, you will have the ability to review all those questions submitted today, and we can publish responses and answers where appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Excuse me. So, Jason, if I may, just before redirecting investors to provide with their feedback, just ask you for a few closing comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. I mean, obviously, investors have been very patient with us so far, and really now, as much as at any time, it's all about delivery of projects. And certainly, the delivery of the Valcor project is extremely important to us, and the early revenues from that. Obviously, that's key to the planning going forward. But most importantly, in terms of the funds that we're looking to raise, they're extremely important for us to be able to contract with the third parties needed to carry on the MSc trial and other activities. So obviously we have the placing is now done, but the open offer funds for us is extremely important to make sure that we can deliver on getting these projects to the final phase of commercialization. So yeah, thank you investors for your patience, but I appreciate that it's wearing thin, but we are fully committed to getting this done.
That's fantastic. Jason, Andy, thanks indeed for updating investors today. Can I please ask investors not to close the session? You should be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order the team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and they're greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team at QUADRISE PLC, I'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.